We are 10 days away from the college football season. The Kool-Aid is flowing in abundance. And I got to thinking, can Texas really make the college football playoff this year in 2023?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. That's in all caps, or enter the promo code Locked On College for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. And on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are discussing if Texas has a path to the college football playoff. In the second segment, we are ranking the top 5 commits to Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns football team since the 2022 class. And speaking of the 2022 class, some players from that year that may be on the bubble, may be on the verge of being recruited over. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Like I said, we are 10 days away from Texas football, 3 days away from college football, period. Cannot wait to sit down on Saturday and watch a bunch of teams play, even if it's not my favorite team play. But like I said, we're 10 days away from Texas football. And when you wake up tomorrow, we'll be in the single digits, 9 days away from seeing Texas play Rice and DKR. And I'm so excited because it's been such a long offseason, right? It's been 9 months of hearing what Texas should do this year, how talented they are, what Quinn Ewers should look like. Can Sark get to 10 wins? Will Texas finally get their first Big 12 championship since 2009, just a whole bunch of yapping, right? A whole bunch of Kool-Aid or a whole bunch of they won't do this, same old Texas, whatever, right? We're 10 days away from seeing the actual product on the field and letting the past do the talking. So super excited to be on this journey. I was just thinking yesterday that I started this February 2022, and less than 2 years later, we already have 3,200 subscribers on YouTube and a big following on audio. And that's something that I never would have imagined, right? So, as always, if, you like and enjoy the show, please continue to like and subscribe and, tell a friend, a coworker, an auntie, an uncle, your grandma, whoever, right? To check out Locked On Longhorns on YouTube or on audio. And I appreciate that support as well, right? Like I said, I could not do this podcast every day, 19 shows a month, whatever it is, without all the support I get. So we're talking about Texas to the college football playoff this year, potentially. And I think if you ask most Texas fans what their expectations for the team were this year, they would say they expect, the team to get to 10 wins for the first time since 2018. They would expect the team to be in Arlington at least for the Big 12 championship game. I expect them to win it, but anything can happen in a one-game setting. We saw last year where TCU went undefeated in the regular season and then lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. So I think most Texas fans would be happy if they got there, right? I don't think I would be satisfied if we lost that game, but it certainly would be a step in the right direction. And I haven't heard a lot of Texas fans expecting to get into the college football playoff this year, especially in the last year of there only being 4 teams to make it, right? That doesn't really leave a bunch of room for error in terms of navigating through your schedule. But I've been on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, right? And there are a lot, or it seems to be a lot of, kind of college football experts or national pundits that really believe in this Texas football team, not only as a team that should take the next step this year, but a team that possibly could be in the college football playoff, and a team that a lot of people are starting to come out and say should beat Alabama in week 2 on the road. And I think that that's where the conversation kind of starts with the college football playoff for this Texas football team, because when you look at that Alabama game, it's by far the juiciest matchup on their schedule, right? When you look at Oklahoma, they were 6-7 last year. Even though they have an easy schedule and they've brought in some more talent, you don't know if they're going to take that big jump to being a, really tough matchup or a signature win on your schedule, because last year that was not a signature win, right? When you look at Kansas State, they did win the Big 12 championship, but they lost some really talented players, right? Deuce Vaughn, Julius Brents, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, who shouldn't have won it at the edge position, right? So will Kansas State be able to match that and be as good as they were last year? Will that be a signature win? Texas Tech is a team that's hot, right? But that's it. They're just hot, right? Will they be good enough on the field this year for that to be a signature win? TCU, they went, I think 13-2 last year, 14-2, whatever it was, 13-2, it would have had to be. But they lost a lot of talent, and a lot of people expect TCU to fall off, right? So I think Alabama is the only game on your schedule that, at least to the national media and the College Football Playoff Committee, they would say, oh, okay, that's a signature win, right? If you were to lose to Alabama and then run the table, I'm not sure that the other Big 12 teams would hold up their bargain enough to get Texas into the College Football Playoff, especially in the last year of only 4 teams making it. So I think it would be really prestigious if Texas could make it to the College Football Playoff this year, especially being in the last year of 4 teams, because I think starting next year, when it expands to 12, there should be no scenario in which Texas is not a College Football Playoff team each and every year. I don't care how daunting your SEC schedule is. I don't care if you're playing Ohio State or Michigan in the out of conference. There should not be a scenario with all the talent on this football team, with the resources we have, with NIL and with this coaching staff, that Texas does not end up a top 12 team in college football next year moving forward at any point, right? So like I said, the conversation is going to kind of start and end this year, on September 9th for Texas. And if they go into Alabama and win that game, then I think they have a path and probably control their own destiny to the College Football Playoff, because it will validate everything we've heard all offseason. Oh, okay, this Texas football team is for real. If they lose that game to Alabama, then the narrative is, oh, okay, same old Texas. And like I said, I'm not sure there's another game on your schedule that's juicy enough to propel you into the College Football Playoff, even if Alabama is your only loss. So if Texas has a path to the College Football Playoff, that means they would have to be one of the top 4 teams. So let's look at some of the other contenders for the College Football Playoff this season and see where they might trip up, or if they have a clearer path to the College Football Playoff. And we're going to start with Georgia, and I think they're a lock to make it. I think their only question mark is they've had Stetson Bennett as their quarterback for the last 2 years, who probably based on his ranking shouldn't have started, at the University of Georgia. But just for some reason, they've been a little wonky at the quarterback position there. But, of course, Stetson Bennett stepped in and won 2, national championships. So it all worked out. And now they're going to Carson Beck, right? And so, you would have to see with a new quarterback if he can maintain the level of success they've had the last few years. But, we know it's the University of Georgia, the way they've recruited, that defense, what they have on the offensive side of the ball, that offensive line, Brock Bowers, their running game. They have good enough receivers, right, to make some noise and make plays. You just would expect Georgia to be back in the College Football Playoff this year. And really, I think the only time they would be challenged is in the SEC championship game. But I just don't see a scenario in which Georgia would lose more than one game. I think they probably go undefeated. And even with one loss, they should still end up in the College Football Playoff. I looked at their schedule, and it's super cake for a 2-time defending national champion, right? I mean, they're just going to blow through the majority of their schedule. The only 2 games I could see even being a problem, maybe even giving them any type of anxiety, is at Tennessee, with that offense they have, even though Georgia kind of manhandled Tennessee when they were undefeated last year. But, if you go on the road, 100,000 in Rocky Top, it's a tough environment, SEC football, anything can happen. Maybe not to this Georgia team, but anything can happen. That could be a game at least to watch out for, right? And that's a big rivalry. And then in the SEC championship game, maybe if they play at Alabama, a la 2021, with Bryce Young, even though Bryce Young's not there anymore, maybe a team can knock them off in the SEC championship game. But worst case scenario, I think they lose one game. I think Georgia is essentially a lock to make the College Football Playoff this year, unless Carson Beck is just horrible at the quarterback position. And I don't think that's the case. Michigan, they've been there the last 2 years, I believe, if not the last year for sure. And they return a ton of talent. Jim Harbaugh said he expects 20 players to be drafted from this Michigan team this year. Not sure if that's realistic, right? But they are super talented. Bring back J.J. McCarthy. They bring back Blake Corum, who certainly was in the Doak Walker and Heisman conversation before he got hurt last year. They always have one of the best offensive lines in the country, and that's a really good defensive team as well. And when you look at their schedule, it's super cake as well. So cake that Jim Harbaugh is accepting a 3-game suspension, and it's probably not going to matter at all, right? And when you look at games that may be pitfalls on their schedule, it is a little bit tougher than Georgia, right? But I still think they'll be able to run through it. Now, this game might be surprising. I'm mentioning this as a potential pitfall for the Michigan Wolverines, but at Nebraska, right, on September 30th. I just think that Matt Rule is there. He has a track record of turning teams around really quickly in college football. I know that he didn't work out with the Carolina Panthers, but, some coaches are just built for college football and not the NFL. And I think that that's a sneaky game at Nebraska. We know they sell out that stadium pretty much almost every game and have done it for the last decade. that could be a tough environment, for a Michigan team going into Nebraska, and maybe they pull off the upset. But Michigan should win that game at Penn State. A lot of people are high on Penn State. They are a top 10 team right now, going into Happy Valley. If it's a whiteout and, they got the crowd going crazy, that could be a tough environment. I could see Penn State knocking off Michigan. And of course, in the big game, the biggest rivalry in college football, it seems, Michigan and Ohio State, anything can happen in that game. So even though Michigan has won the last two, maybe Ohio State can knock off Michigan this year, even though that game is at home in the big house. So I would expect Michigan to get to the college football playoff. I could see a scenario in which Michigan goes undefeated. I could see a scenario in which they beat Nebraska, Penn State, and Ohio State, even though those games could be potential pitfalls for the Michigan team. But even if they only lose one game, you should expect them to be in the college football playoff again this year. So now that's two teams, which leaves two spots. My next team is Ohio State, and I'm not sure Ohio State makes it this year, right? Because they have a lot of uncertainty at quarterback. They were kind of on the outside looking in last year with C.J. Stroud, but they were able to make it because Alabama kind of had a down year and lost two games, right? In a down year. So they still have not announced a starting quarterback, and I just don't know if you can assume that the quarterback they put in there will be as productive as C.J. Stroud was, right? C.J. Stroud was a Heisman candidate and the number 2 overall player in the NFL draft, right? At some point, you have to fall off at the quarterback position, especially, like we've seen with Alabama, right? Whoever they start this year is not going to be Bryce Young, right? You just cannot keep stringing, NFL quarterback after NFL quarterback after NFL quarterback. Eventually, there's going to be some drop off, and this may be the year for Ohio State. And they have some tough games at Notre Dame, right? That's a game that they played, in Columbus last year with C.J. Stroud and struggled to win. Notre Dame is going to be a lot better this season. That could be a team that knocks off Ohio State. They have Penn State at home this year. But like I said, Penn State is a top 10 team, a team that people are really high on. They could knock off Ohio State. And then, of course, they have to play at Michigan. That looks like a loss right now. So I see a scenario in which Ohio State has 2 losses this year. I do not think they make the college football playoff. USC, if you watch the college football playoff preview on the channel, I predicted that USC will win the national championship this year, right? I don't know, crazy. I think USC will win the national championship. And I think that's because in any game they step on the field, they have Caleb Williams, who probably will win the Heisman this year and is the best player in college football. So anytime they step on the field, they will have the best player on the field. And I know it's USC. There's always going to be concerns about the offensive line and the defense, but I just think Caleb Williams is too special. I think that offense under Lincoln Riley is too special. I think he finally gets over the hump and wins his first national championship this year. But they would have to get to the college football playoff to do that. And their toughest games on their schedule are Utah at home, Washington at home. So those are blessings, but 2 really tough teams that are going to give USC struggle, and then at Oregon, right? And that all happens in a 4-game stretch. So, that could be really tough. And you could see them falling to one of those matchups just because you're playing so many tough games in a row that eventually one of these really talented teams could get the better of you. But if they only have 1 loss and they can win the Pac-12 championship game or, of course, go undefeated, then USC will certainly be in the college football playoff. And like I said, I expect them to be there because I predicted them to win the national championship. And my last contender, these are my personal contenders, Clemson, right? And I think a lot of people are forgetting about Clemson, especially after they had a down year last year and lost 3 games. One of those games was to South Carolina by 1 point, where DJ Uiagalelei, I don't even know how to say his name, didn't even throw for 100 yards. The other game was big loss to Notre Dame at home once Notre Dame kind of turned it on. And then you never know how, much stock these players are putting into the bowl game, but they lost to Tennessee by a couple touchdowns. I think that was Cade Klubnik's first start, right? But us as Texas fans, we know how good Cade Klubnik was at Westlake, and, we expect him, to be really good at Clemson. And I think Clemson can get back into that national championship conversation because we know they're always going to have a really good defense. I think they have a really good running game, and they're just a sound, football team. So if Cade Klubnik hits, and he is who we thought he's going to be out of Westlake, then they certainly have a path to the college football playoff this year. When you look at their schedule, they have Florida State at home, which is a blessing. And I think Florida State is going to be really good, but I think like last year, Clemson probably takes care of business in that game. They play North Carolina at home. Shout out to Mac Brown. Of course, they have, Drake May, who is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But I think as a whole, North Carolina doesn't have enough talent to beat Clemson. And then out at South Carolina, that's a tough environment to play in. Spencer Rattler may have a better year than he did last season. We saw last year where he was able to knock off Clemson. But I just think Cade Klubnik, year two, that Clemson football team, I think they're on a mission, and I think they're going to knock off South Carolina. I really think there's a chance that worst case scenario, they lose one game, but I really think there's a chance Clemson goes undefeated throughout the regular season and they make the college football playoff. So, like I said, Texas certainly has a path. It all depends on what happens in that Alabama game. But if I had to put my money on it right now, my college football playoff would be Georgia, Michigan, USC, and Clemson, with USC being the national champion. But if Texas goes into Tuscaloosa in week 2 and beats Alabama, then they control their own destiny. I might have to update this list on the episode following that on Locked On Longhorns. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to rank the top 5 players that have committed to the University of Texas since the 2022 class of the Steve Sarkisian era. Bird Dogs make you look good. Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any movement. And Bird Dogs use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. That's all caps, or enter the promo code lockedoncollege for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, or promo code lockedoncollege. Once again, all caps, for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right, so I got to thinking, just about how talented, these recruiting classes, that we're bringing into the University of Texas are, and just how much talent, Steve Sarkisian has brought into the University of Texas, period, since he's taken over the helm, right? And I wanted to rank all of the players, not all of them, but the top 5 players that he has gotten to commit to him, since the 2022 class. I couldn't do sign because obviously the 2024 class has not had a chance to sign, and you would assume that Colin Simmons would be on my list, right? If you follow Texas football, spoiler alert, he is, right? And I didn't want to include Xavier Worthy in it, even though he probably would be in the top 5 because he was just kind of the one player from the 2021 class, but most of that class is, credited to Tom Herman. So here goes nothing, right? The top 5 players who have committed to Sark since 2022, and this is more of a projection, right? So this is more like if we're looking in 2028, 2029, right, when all of these players would obviously be gone from the University of Texas, hopefully, right, if everything goes right. Who were the top 5 players that committed to Texas at this point, right? Because half of these players haven't even taken a snap for the University of Texas. Only one player on my list has, I should say. So this is more of a projection, right? If we're looking 5-6 years down the road, who were the top 5 players from these 3 recruiting classes as we look at it on August 23rd? Because obviously the 2024 class is not set in stone yet, and there still are some players to commit, right? So when we look at it, my number 1 player who has committed to Sark, projecting long-term since the 2022 class, is Arch Manning, right? I just think when you look at the quarterback position being the most important position on the field, that holds a ton of weight, right? And, I think Arch Manning will be the leader of this football team going into the SEC. We're already starting to see, kind of the writing on the wall, some of the tea leaves that, he may even be threatening Malik Murphy right now for that quarterback 2 spot. And if that's the case right now, then a year from now, I probably would expect, Arch Manning to win the starting quarterback job, even though Malik Murphy is going to make it really tough for him because he's a really talented quarterback and he brings a lot to the table himself as well, right? But I think when you just look at Arch, his pedigree, his football acumen, his work ethic, his, on the field stuff, his ability to throw the ball accurately, his mechanics, his progressions, all of that, he just really fits the Manning mold, right? And they're 3 for 3 so far in terms of success, right? Archie, Peyton, and Eli were all really, really good at this football thing. And I think you just see the same dynamic in terms of Arch Manning, right? And he's athletic, right? And I think he might be the most athletic out of the 4. And so I think when you go into the SEC with Arch Manning as your leader, you're going to have him, if he starts next year, for 2 years as your starting quarterback with all of the talent around him. I just think he will be the quarterback. If Quinn Ewers can't do it this year, Arch Manning will certainly be the quarterback to put Texas back on the map, to put Texas back at the top of college football. And I think for that reason alone, he has to be the number one player that Sark has brought in since the 2022 class. And I think that will only continue in the NFL. I think we're looking at a future superstar at the quarterback position, not only at Texas, but wherever team is lucky enough to get him in the NFL, he will be the face of the franchise for 15 plus years. Kelvin Banks is my number 2, and I had to slot him in at number 2 because we've actually seen it on the field, right? He's the only player on my list we've seen on the field. And in his first year, he was a true freshman All-American. And in his first year, he went against some of the best edges in the country, right? Will Anderson, the number 3 overall pick. Tyree Wilson, the number 7 overall pick. Will McDonald, the number 15 overall pick. And then I forgot where the dude from Kansas State went, but I think he went at the end of the first round to the Kansas City Chiefs, right? So he went against 4 first-round edges in his true freshman year, not being an early enrollee, thrown into the fire, and he was able to be a freshman All-American and more than hold his own against 4 NFL players at that position. So I think Kelvin Banks is special. I think that he brings everything to the table you want as a left tackle. And I think, Quinn Ewers doesn't have much to worry about with his blind side when Kelvin Banks is blocking. He's just a special player, a special talent, and somebody that they say he works as if he's not in the 2 deep, right? He's a starter, a superstar on this team, and he works like he's fighting for a roster spot. And that's exactly what you want from one of your best players. He just has the makeup, right, of a player that's going to be legendary at this level and hopefully at the next level. I think Kelvin Banks is the second best player, at least right now. I could be wrong, right? But he's the second best player that has committed to Steve Sarkisian since 2022, if I'm projecting long term. Number 3 is Colin Simmons. And there's no secret or no surprise that my top 3 players are a quarterback, an edge rusher, and an offensive tackle, because I've always said on here, those are the 3 most important positions in college football. And I had to put Colin Simmons at 3 because we've actually seen Kelvin Banks on the field. But when you talk about a dynamic player at the edge position like Colin Simmons, somebody who can wreck every single play on the offense, somebody who can, give quarterbacks, offensive linemen and offensive coordinators nightmares, and somebody who can just take over a game, a la, Myles Garrett, a Von Miller, a Nick Bosa, a Micah Parsons, players like that, right? Colin Simmons has that type of pedigree, right? Like last year, 33 tackles for loss, 22 sacks, en route to, a state championship. So he is just that type of player, that type of pedigree, that edge player that can dominate at that position and can really, make the rest of your defense better, because the best defenses have an organic pass rush. The best defenses can get to the quarterback with 4. And when Colin Simmons gets to the University of Texas, it looks like that's what Texas will have. Just a dynamic, future superstar at that position, something they haven't had in over 10 years at the 40 acres. And like I said, he has that Von Miller, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Micah Parsons type mold where he's just a freak athlete at that position and he wins more often than he loses. So I got Colin Simmons as the number 3 player to commit to Sark since 2022. Jonte Cook is my number 4. And I've said multiple times that I think Jonte Cook might be the most talented wide receiver in the room right now. Arch Manning and Jonte Cook certainly could be the next Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley on the 40 acres. I think Jonte Cook is Xavier worthy with better route running, and he's more physical, right? And I think that when you pair these 2 together next year, even though we'll see Jonte on the field this season, you're looking at 2 years of just explosiveness, right? Mac Jones, Devontae Smith type stuff, at the 40 acres, especially if this Texas football team continues to get better and better. So I think Jonte Cook might be the most talented wide receiver in the room this year. He'll certainly make an impact this year, but over the next 2 years, he's going to be the best wide receiver in college football, and will go down as one of the best wide receivers in Texas football history, and will be a superstar on Sundays as well. And my number 5 player to end the list is Cedric Baxter, and he's going to have a big role this year, should be a starting running back the next 2 years for the Texas football team. And when you look at that size and speed combination, his vision, his ability to break tackles, make people miss, or just run over people. He started off, his high school career as a wide receiver, so he has really good hands. And, they talked about, with Steve Sarkisian this early on, he trusts him in pass protection. That's huge for a true freshman running back who hasn't even played a snap yet, right? So he's obviously came on, this offseason, and, he's put on like 15 pounds, and he's really had a strong offseason, for a true freshman. And that's why, Steve Sarkisian trusts him. And he was the number 1 running back in the country for a reason. And we're going to see that translate on the field this year. So I think Cedric Baxter will be the next great running back at the University of Texas following Bijan Robinson, may even win a Doak Walker Award. He will contribute to Texas being running back U. And I think 5-6 years from now, based on who's committed on August 23rd, 2023, Cedric Baxter will be one of the 5 best players that were recruited by Steve Sarkisian from the 2022 through the 2024 classes. So that's my top 5: Arch Manning, Kelvin Banks, Colin Simmons, Jonte Cook, and Cedric Baxter. But of course, there are a ton of talented players that I left off. And that's why we think Texas is on the verge of being one of the top teams in college football again. A quick word from our sponsors, and then some players from the 2022 class who may need to show out this year or could be on the verge of being recruited over. All right. So really quickly, for the last segment, I was thinking about, some players in the 2022 class. And now Texas is kind of at that point where they're bringing in so much talent, year in and year out, especially with the transfer portal and the one-time transfer rule and, being able to play, immediately, being eligible immediately. Texas is at the point now where, like I said, so much talent is coming in and year out. And so how much grace, how much time do you give a player to develop and succeed on the field before you have to think about bringing in a player to at least challenge him for that spot, right? And I think you're at the point now where at most you can give a player 2 years, right? Before you at least start to think about replacing him at that position or bringing in somebody to compete with him at that position. So if we look at it, that 2022 class next year would be their 3rd year, right? And so if they don't make noise this year, would you expect them to make noise as juniors, right? Or at that point, would you already have a contingency plan to bring in somebody or have already brought in somebody to challenge them or take over their spot, right? And so that's kind of the case, right? At these schools like Georgia, Alabama, Texas now, hopefully USC, Michigan, Ohio State, these big programs, you really have 2 years to make a name for yourself. You really have 2 years to kind of prove that you can be an asset to that football team. If not, they got to move on and find somebody because these are the teams that expect to compete at the highest level every year. And so my first player is Jaden Blue. All right. And we expected him to be a big part of the offense this year. All throughout the offseason, we were kind of confused on how the running back rotation would look. And Steve Sarkisian came out and really provided a lot of clarity, right? He said he has 3 running backs he feels comfortable with in pass protection. And if you talk to any coach, we know what that means. Those are the 3 running backs that are going to play a lot this year. And everybody else, they're going to play sparingly. And he said that was Jonathan Brooks, Keelan Robinson, and Cedric Baxter. Somehow, with all of Jaden Blue's talent, he's on the outside looking in. I made the comparison a few weeks ago on the podcast. Is he the new Alfred Collins, where he has all the talent in the world, but for just some reason it doesn't click and the coaching staff doesn't trust him? That seems to be the case. So Jaden Blue, super talented. Of course, he could be the Lightning to Cedric Baxter's Thunder next year, but with Jared Gibson and Christian Clark coming in next season, I'm not sure that would guarantee to be the case, right? So Jaden Blue, I'm not sure what he can do this year to get on the field and make a huge impact, but he's certainly a player that may be on the verge of being recruited over at the University of Texas, as talented as he is. Number 2 is BJ Allen. I think we forget he was the number 117th overall player in the country. You would expect to start to hear, about him making some waves this year. But they brought in Jalen Catalon. Of course, you would take Jalen Catalon anyway. You had Jaron Thompson, and we've heard, this offseason about Keaton Crawford. We've heard about Warren Robertson as a true freshman. We've heard about Derek Williams as a true freshman. We've heard that they're moving Jelani McDonald around, and he's making plays everywhere, sometimes at the safety position as well. But we just haven't heard a ton about BJ Allen, right? And when we have heard about BJ Allen, it's that he's not progressed as far along as we thought he would, right? So that was surprising to me. I always thought that, him coming out of Alito would be a really good player for this Texas football team. And of course, he still has time, but it just does not seem like he will have a huge role for this Texas football team this year. And then next year you bring in a safety like Jordan Johnson-Rubel. And of course, you'll always be looking in the transfer portal as well. So, I would surmise that if BJ Allen does not have a big year this year or does not show the coaching staff something they have not seen thus far, then he won't have a big role next year, right? And they'll be bringing in players to play over BJ Allen. My third player is Jamon Tapp, right? And I don't think we have a ton of just dogs at the edge position right now, but it seems like the rotation is pretty solidified, right? You have Barron Sorrell, Justice Finkley, Ethan Burke, and Colton Vasek. And then we know that, Tassili Akana is going to play a part. All of these players are going to play a part. But then you have Anthony Hill, who's going to be kind of your designated pass rusher on certain downs and kind of be in special packages to help put pressure on the quarterback, right? So it just does not seem like Jamon Tapp is going to have a huge role on the outside of being depth or being a fresh body, right? To come in and get a pass rush while everybody else takes a breather, right? Then next year, you're going to bring in Colin Simmons. And of course, you're going to be looking for D linemen in the portal as you get into the SEC. So, I think it's going to take a big year, for Jamon Tapp. Otherwise, he could be on the verge of, being on the bubble or being recruited over and not having much playing time next year if he stays at Texas. And then my last two players are Christopher Ross and Jere Bledsoe up front in the middle, right? You brought in Trill Carter in the transfer portal. You brought in Sadir Mitchell, and you're looking to get, Dominic McKinley next weekend on September 1st. And so that is a position where you've kind of recruited over Christopher Ross and Jere Bledsoe. We just haven't heard a ton about those players making an impact. Now, hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully they get into the rotation this year and can be assets on the football team. But, we've heard about, of course, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, Sadir Mitchell, all of those players. And then, like I said, you brought in a lot of D tackles next year, and then Trill Carter in the transfer portal. We just haven't heard a lot about Christopher Ross and Jere Bledsoe. And, like the rest of the players on this list, could be on the verge of being recruited over on a very talented Texas football team. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.